ties and the strong ties. And what I thought was interesting to kind of focus on was a little smidgen of what I talked about in the book. Chapter 5, I believe, talked a lot about how things spread, communication, and diseases, all different things that kind of spread. And what stood out to me is the two different paths that they talked about, the levee flights and the random walks. And they described those as levee flights, or I'm sorry, to random walks where each step within the network is equal in distance, but it's all in random different directions. And then you have the levee flights where the distances of connection are separated in different distances within that network. So I was trying to think of a couple examples that would kind of help me better understand a little bit of how these connections works and how we can apply to them, and how we can explain how certain events come about. So I was thinking about random walks, which took me a little bit to think about, and I started thinking about the riots and walks community in California back in the, I believe it was the 70s?
60s.
Was it the 60s? Yeah, 60s.
65.
Right. All right, so in there they had, I mean, this is a time of civil rights movement. There's a lot of different issues of people kind of taking persecution from the police. And then when the Watts riots started, it's all about this arrest that happened. And people started talking about it and started spreading. And then all of a sudden, the whole community of Watts was throwing riots, had riots out in the streets. And they got really out of hand to where, you know, police had to step in, the National Guard stepped in, and a lot of people were killed within it. But this all started from a single event that happened that a couple of people had witnessed, and all of a sudden, everybody knew. And I kind of saw that as a random walk because it was within that community where it all started. So it started going from person to person to person that everybody knew. So I started thinking about, okay, the levee flights. How did the levee flights apply to it? And I started thinking about the 99.1% movement that went on. That first started out with a group of people who had a purpose, and they went to go demonstrate their purpose. But as it grew bigger and bigger, it started going all over the United States. You know, you had people in New York, you had people in locals. I know Fayetteville had a little bit of movement. Different people gathered together in the same purpose. But the problem with the levee flight is that that not everybody gets that communication that was going on. And that was kind of the evidence of when the news media got in there and started to interview certain people, where some people had a purpose for being there, and other people had no idea why they're there, just kind of partying a good time and everything. So I thought that was interesting, the way that those two methods connect within the network, and so that we can kind of identify how connection and communication moves about. And that can be something that can cause a big change in the system, or something that can just be a little smidgen that happened.
I'm John Clark, and I was just going to touch on kind of a personal experience of myself. I find this very comical. As I've told all y'all a million times, I'm from Mississippi, grew up there. My grandparents, all of my family is from Mississippi. Never had anyone else live in any other state except me, and my parents lived in Arkansas. When I was a child, my grandfather owned a dairy farm in Madison, Mississippi. A little small town, and now it's a metropolitan area, suburb of Jackson. But I thought at the beginning of this chapter, you know, it described an economic disaster, and then the disaster we went through in 2008, everybody losing investments, and I think that I know the exact opposite of someone who invested their money. My grandfather used to take all the money that he would make, you know, each month, and pay bills and do whatever, and put whatever in the bank that his wife made him do, and the rest of it he would keep in a freezer. And that way, if there were a fire or anything else happened, you know, except for being burglarized, but we're talking about, you know, the 1950s, 60s, rural Mississippi, Caucasian man, probably not going to have a lot of issues with that, and it's in the country. So this man would keep enough money to support his family, you know, no matter what, at the end of the month. There would always be that amount of money frozen in the freezer. And when I was finally old enough, I'd always heard this, and I thought it was a myth. And opened up their freezer one day, they took me out there and showed me a little spot, just rubber bands around money. So my grandfather kept the money frozen to keep it from fireproof or any other way of getting damaged. I thought it was a pretty nice way to save a little bit of money. There was no interest rate really in that, so we weren't losing too much money by not having anything. But I thought that was kind of interesting for a personal experience anyway, to be this young and know somebody freezer at the same time. So frozen assets. Exactly.
What was that dress again? Sarah, you saying anything?
Oh, I'd just like to close this up and say, and one lady said during the bank crisis, everybody else is doing it. It must be the right thing to do. I mean, we're social creatures and we're really habitual, and so just like Keith was saying about people not even knowing why they're sitting outside Wall Street, they're just sitting there because everybody else was doing it. So I question a lot of these huge mass movements and wonder how much of it is honest and pure and how much of it is just because everybody else is doing it.
Any questions? How homogeneous are your social networks in terms of class, race, ethnicity? That person.
It's pretty homogeneous. I mean, there's a I grew up in a middle class society. Most people I know middle class era. I have a couple. Well, my ethnicity background, Hispanic, is pretty large, whereas it comes to blacks and African Americans, it's very minimal. There's only just a couple within that. So, I mean, I think my network is pretty terrible compared to other people. Mine's pretty closed off, but
Sure.
I know that it grew as soon as I became a member of the University of Arkansas. It was really small and extremely homogeneous, and now it's much more broad than most people's my age, just because of the interactions I have with my class members, with my professors, with people of different ages, people of different class, status, or whatever, gender, all kinds of.
Much more broad than it was. One, because I'm a few years older than them. I've had 2 separate careers and graduated 2 separate times. So just from experience living in different places, I'd say that it's more broad now, but it's still very, very homogeneous. Yes.
I worked in the Middle East and worked in Jordan for 15 years. And I was there with the chancellor last April. And we were meeting with most of the ministers at the dinner party, and the prime minister came. There's this crisis. King Abdullah is in deep shit, by the way. He's the next one to go. So, have you been following social media and its impact on the Arab Spring? Did you talk about that at all? The Arab Spring and social media, fall of Gaddafi, stuff going on in Syria right now.
I taught it in class, but
yeah.
I was taking a Middle Eastern Studies course like right when the Arab Spring was happening, and I took it with Dr. Swedenborg, and we focused on how Facebook really launched the Arab Spring on like a really wide base. So it's quite interesting.
Well, I was in Egypt this past summer for 2 weeks, and I took the train up the Nile, and it was really interesting. I was able to use my my Safari map program, or my iPad map program all the way up. I knew where I was within. So it's 98% of the population of Egypt is within the 6-mile corridor of the Nile. It was really interesting to see how, in reality, that all works. By the way, Israel, the next one, had a big blow up among Israelis because it's a 6 families control probably 80% of the economy. Be fed up. Jordan is going to be the other shoe that drops. I mean, you're going to see social media there being weird. For example, his gambling debts now are being reported back from Monaco. There are pictures now of his mistresses on the web. Those kinds of things. And they just discovered that 18% of GDP of Jordan goes to 500 people. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. By the way, there's an article in last week's Economist on Obama, and he is now hiring some of the best minds in Silicon Valley to use technology to get reelected. So that's going to be interesting to read all this kind of stuff. Anything else? We about out of time?
Out of time.
Okay. Thank you all. I enjoyed this.